The Ashes of Moloch, Part 1. Consider, if you will, a boy named John, just 7 years old, in a Brooklyn neighborhood where the line between miracles and nightmares blurs. In this realm of creaking houses and whispered secrets, a child's imagination burns bright, a beacon of divine possibility. But in the shadows, something ancient stirs, its hunger older than time, its name carved in embers. Moloch, the devourer of innocence. Step into this tale where divinity meets dread, and the battle for a young soul begins with a whisper in the dark. John woke with the sky coursing through him, his small body alive with the echo of a dream. He'd soared above Brooklyn, over the candy stores and stoops, the city a mosaic of flickering streetlights and weathered brownstones. His arms had summoned lightning from the heavens, cracking the air with raw power, while his voice parted the clouds like a divine command, revealing stars that twinkled in approval. In that boundless night, he was a superhero, mending broken lives with a mere touch, saving the lost with a single thought. He could feel the energy surging through him, a holy fire that made him invincible, connected to something greater than himself, a force of pure light and possibility. I'm special, he whispered into the stillness of his bedroom, the words a solemn vow to the divine spark pulsing deep in his chest. At 7, the world was an endless canvas, miracles waiting in his hands, ready to heal wounds, to bend reality, to defy the pull of gravity itself. The saints he'd seen in church might stare down with their cold, marble eyes, but John knew in his heart he was more than their silent judgment. He was a boy destined to soar, to change everything. He lay there for a moment, staring at the cracked ceiling, where faint water stains twisted like forgotten maps. The dream lingered, warming him against the chill of the room, and he imagined himself leaping from the window, catching the wind, and gliding over the rooftops where old men played dominoes on stoops and kids chased fireflies in the summer dusk. It wasn't just fantasy. It felt real, like a promise from God himself, a glimpse of his true purpose. But as the morning light filtered through the dusty curtains, reality crept back in, pulling him down to earth. The house on Maple Street had other plans for him, plans that whispered of confinement rather than flight. Its Victorian frame groaned under the weight of years, walls stained with the ghosts of arguments and unspoken regrets. The air inside was thick, scented with yesterday's pasta sauce and the faint underlying must-damp wood. The basement door, tucked away at the end of the shadowed hallway, breathed a damp chill that John swore was alive, like the house itself was exhaling some hidden malice. He avoided it whenever he could, his imagination turning it into a portal to unknown terrors, though Grandfather Frank's gruff warnings, "Keep out, boy, or you'll regret it," were deterrent enough to keep his curiosity at bay. Frank was a man of few words, his face etched with lines from a life of hard labor, and he guarded that door like a sentinel, his eyes always watchful, as if he knew something lurked below. Downstairs the kitchen was a whirlwind of morning chaos. Mary, his mother, rattled pots and pans with a rhythm that spoke of exhaustion rather than joy, her face etched with lines of worry that seemed to deepen with each passing day. Tina, his teenage sister, slumped over a bowl of cereal, her Walkman blaring tinny music through headphones, her world sealed off from the family's tensions. Jim, his father, was already a ghost in the house, his bedroom door locked like an impenetrable vault, shutting out the world. John didn't yet understand that the sour reek clinging to Jim's clothes when he stumbled home late night was whiskey, but he knew it made his stomach twist in knots, a harbinger of the curses and slammed doors that followed. Jim would vanish upstairs without a word, leaving the family to navigate the aftermath of his absence. John slid into his seat at the kitchen table, his sketchbook open before him. He began drawing himself as the caped hero from his dream, lightning crackling from outstretched fists, his figure bold against the paper. The lines came easily, fueled by the lingering thrill of flight. Mary glanced over from the stove, her smile thin and fleeting, as if it cost her effort to summon it. "Big imagination you've got there, Johnny," she said, her voice soft but trembling slightly, holding back a tide of something heavier, something adult that John wasn't meant to carry yet. Outside the window, Brooklyn's ancient oaks clawed at the gray sky, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers grasping for the sun. John barely noticed, his mind still aloft, soaring through clouds, saving the world from unseen evils. But the illusion of that boundless freedom shattered one ordinary evening, as illusions often do in the quiet moments. John was in the living room, crayons scattered across the coffee table like fallen soldiers, when Jim burst through the front door, his eyes bloodshot from a long shift at Con Edison. The air shifted immediately, thickening with tension. "What's this junk all over the place?" Jim snarled, snatching up John's latest drawing with rough hands. "You're a mistake, you know that. A drip we didn't plan for." The words landed like a physical blow, cutting deeper than any blade, a singular wound that seared into John's memory, one he would carry like a scar forever. Mary, standing in the doorway, looked away, her silence a heavy presence, as Jim stormed off to his room. slamming the door behind him. John's superhero figure dissolved into meaningless smudged lines on the paper, his heart twisting into a knot of confusion and hurt. Why did his father's words feel like they were stripping away pieces of him? Outside the home, Jim was a different man entirely, all charm and easy laughter, grinning at the candy store down the block, shaking hands with neighbors, his car always gleaming under the streetlights to impress anyone who glanced his way. La bella figura, John would later learn it was called, the Italian art of presenting a perfect mask to the world, hiding the chaos that festered within. But inside these walls, Jim was a tempest, his rages unpredictable, carving away at John's inner light with every sharp word. Useless, he'd mutter under his breath when John dared to ask for a simple game of catch or a story before bed, his love feeling like a wall built of thorns, impossible to scale. Winter arrived with a vengeance that January, the air turning sharp and unforgiving, knifing through John's thin jacket like icy blades. The cold seeped into everything, turning the world outside into a frozen tableau. Jim stood in the driveway one bitter afternoon, arms crossed tightly against his chest, his breath fogging the air. Wash the car, John. Gotta look good for the block, he commanded, his voice brooking no argument. John, shivering in the wind, clutched the garden hose with numb fingers, turning on the water and beginning to soap up the hood. The suds froze almost immediately, forming glittering sheets of ice that cracked under his touch. Hurry up, Jim barked, his impatience growing. Run inside and get hot water now. John dashed into the house, filling a bucket from the sink, the steam rising and burning his small hands as he lugged it back outside. He poured it over the car, the scalding water splashing across the metal, seeping into the door seals, but the cold was relentless. It froze anyway, locking the doors in a solid sheet of ice, the handles immovable. Neighbors watched from their stoops, bundled in coats, their eyes cold and curious, but offering no intervention, no one daring to question a father's authority in his own driveway. Mary stood on the porch, her face a mask of quiet guilt and helplessness, her hands wringing a dish towel, but doing nothing to stop the scene unfolding before her. John scrubbed harder, his tears freezing on his cheeks, the cold biting into his bones, his superhero dreams feeling like cruel mockery in the face of Jim's obsession with appearances. Why did the car have to shine so perfectly? Why did everything have to look right on the outside when inside it felt so wrong? The ice on the hood shimmered under the fading light, forming intricate swirls, rune-like patterns that twisted like the tails of dragons from old fairy tales, glinting with an unnatural red hue against the gray sky. A shadow stirred in the alley across the street, its edges sharp and claw-like, and for a split second, John heard a whisper in Italian, "Sei nostro," "You're ours." He blinked hard, his heart racing in his chest, but when he looked again, it was gone, just an ordinary shadow from the overhanging trees. Jim's eyes flashed black for the briefest moment, like ink spilling over glass, then cleared as if nothing had happened. "Faster, you useless kid!" he shouted, oblivious to the deeper chill that had settled over the scene, a cold beyond the winter's grasp. That night, the house felt more alive than ever, its walls humming with an unseen energy that made John's skin prickle. As he passed the basement door on his way to bed, its knob glinted like a watchful eye in the dim hallway light. A faint whisper in Italian, "Vieni," slipped through the crack beneath the door, curling like smoke in the air. Come. John fled to his room, pulling the covers over his head, but sleep brought no refuge, only terror. In his dream, he was at the neighborhood park, rolling down a grassy hill with other kids, their laughter echoing in the warm sun. But the joy turned to horror as the earth beneath him split open with a rumble, a clawed hand bursting through the soil, its scales reeking of sulfur and decay. It plunged into his chest, ripping out his insides in wet, steaming coils that spilled onto the grass. His mother ran toward him, her face contorted in concern, but as she neared, it twisted into something monstrous, her eyes turning to black voids that swallowed the light. "You're tainted," she hissed, her voice a chorus of ancient malice, layered with echoes that weren't her own. John woke with a gasp, his chest aching as if the hand had truly clawed at him, his sheets damp with sweat. The next day dragged on, the dream shadow lingering in every corner. Mary called him into the living room that afternoon, her hands trembling slightly as she motioned for him to sit. She knelt down to his level, her eyes wet with unshed tears. "Johnny, I need to tell you something important," she began, her voice cracking. "Grandma's got cancer. It's bad and she might not be here with us much longer." The word cancer hung in the air like a dark cloud, a shadow John couldn't grasp, death a vast, terrifying concept his young mind couldn't fully hold. What did it mean to be gone forever? His superhero powers, so vivid in his dreams, couldn't fix this, couldn't bring back Grandma's warm hugs or her stories of old Italy. Fear coiled tight in his gut, cold and unrelenting, his divine spark dimming under the weight of this new reality. He wanted to ask why, to beg for more details, but Mary's gaze was distant, lost in her own grief, leaving him alone to carry the burden of this adult truth, a weight too heavy for his small shoulders. Sunday brought the ritual of church, but it offered no solace, only more unease. Mary and Tina dressed for St. Anthony's, but Jim stayed home as always, lounging in his armchair with the newspaper, his side of the family strangers to the pews and prayers. John's paternal grandfather, Frank, had never set foot in a church either, his absence a silent rebellion against the faith that Mary's family clung to so fiercely. Mary's mother and her 5 sisters were devout Catholics, their rosaries clicking like chains of devotion, their lives structured around masses and holy days. The church building itself was a cavern of shadows and echoes, its frescoes looming over John like judgmental giants. Jesus crucified on the cross, blood dripping from the crown of thorns pressed into his brow, his face twisted in eternal agony. Saints depicted with hollow, staring eyes that seemed to follow him as he walked down the aisle, their expressions frozen in suffering or ecstasy. Parishioners knelt before the statues, kissing St. Anthony's marble feet with fervent lips, hugging St. Teresa's form as if it could hug back, their devotion bordering on the grotesque, like worshipping cold idols rather than a living God. The priest swung the censer during the service, incense curling upward in thick, dragon-like plumes that filled the air with a heavy, cloying scent. John sat rigid in the pew, Tina's music faintly audible from her headphones beside him, and he shivered as a fresco's eyes seemed to shift ever so slightly, tracking his movements with an unnatural awareness. The rituals felt pagan to him, not divine, ancient, and morbid, far removed from the pure light of his dreams. A candle on the altar flickered erratically, its shadow stretching across the wall, horned for a fleeting moment before snapping back to normal. No one else noticed, their heads bowed in prayer, but John's heart pounded, the church's beauty twisted into something eerie and oppressive. Aunt Lucia arrived later that week, her suitcase thudding heavily in the hallway, like an ominous warning bell. Her eyes were too bright, almost feverish, her voice a rough rasp that set John's nerves on edge. Left that no good cheater for good this time, she muttered to Mary in the kitchen, unaware, or perhaps uncaring, that John was listening from the stairs, his small form hidden in the shadows. Marco's got me hearing things now. Whispers in the dark, like they're calling my name. Her laugh was sharp and discordant, a sound that didn't belong, and her gaze lingered on John when she spotted him, unsettling in its intensity, as if she saw something in him that he couldn't see himself. At night, her presence amplified the house's unrest. Guttural noises echoed through the vents from her room, like fragmented prayers to something unholy, something not of this world. The house seemed to hum in response, a low vibration that John felt in his bones, and the basement door creaked open just an inch, as if inviting the darkness to spread. Desperate for escape from the growing tension, John climbed to the attic one rainy afternoon, sifting through dusty boxes filled with forgotten relics of the family's past, old photographs yellowed with age, trinkets from Italy, and faded letters tied with string. There, buried beneath a layer of cobwebs, he found a family Bible, its leather cover cracked and worn, pages brittle as autumn leaves. It fell open in his hands to Leviticus 20, verses 2 to 5, the words leaping out at him. Anyone who gives their children to Moloch is to be put to death. They have given their children to Moloch, defiling my sanctuary and profaning my holy name. Moloch. The name struck him like a physical force heavy as stone burning in his mind. He read on, the text describing an ancient god who demanded child sacrifices. Their innocence burned in fires to appease his wrath. Burn marks scarred the edges of the page, as if touched by actual flame, and John's fingers trembled as he traced them. A cold wind gusted through the attic, slamming the door shut, though the window was sealed tight. He felt eyes upon him, not the loving gaze of God, but something older, hungrier, a presence that knew his name and coveted his light. That night, his dreams of flight ceased entirely, replaced by visions of roaring fires and a horned shadow looming over him, its whisper echoing in his ears. The divine spark within him flickered, threatened by the encroaching darkness, and John awoke with a start, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him like the house itself was closing in. And so we leave young John, his visions of miracles fading beneath the burden of truths too vast and heavy for a child's fragile heart. In the shadowed corners of Maple Street, a force older than sin itself weaves its insidious threads through the fractures of a vulnerable family, its name forever etched in ash, Moloch. The battle for this boy's soul has only just begun, and the whispers once faint now grow louder with every passing moment.